Okay, here we are, and it's time to get started on part 5 of Treasure Island. Part 5 is called My Sea Adventure. So we had Jim Hawkins's shore adventure, and now this is going to be a sea adventure. In chapter 22, that kicks it off, is called appropriately How I Began My Sea Adventure. So here we go. There was no return of the mutineers, not so much as another shot out of the woods. They had got their rations for that day, as the captain put it, and we had the place to ourselves at a quiet time to overhaul the wounded and get dinner. Squire and I cooked outside in spite of the danger, and even outside we could hardly tell what we were at for horror of the loud groans that reached us from the doctor's patients. Out of the 8 men who had fallen in the action, only 3 still breathed. That, one of the pirates who had been shot at the loophole, Hunter, and Captain Smollett. And of these, the first 2 were as good as dead. The mutineer, indeed, died under the doctor's knife, and Hunter, do what we could, never recovered consciousness in this world. He lingered all day, breathing loudly like the old buccaneer at home in his apoplectic fit. But the bones of his chest had been crushed by the blow, and his skull fractured in falling, and sometime in the following night, without sign or sound, he went to his Maker. As for the captain, his wounds were grievous indeed, but not dangerous. No organ was fatally injured. Anderson's ball, for it was Job that shot him first, had broken his shoulder blade and touched the lung, not badly. The second had only torn and displaced some muscles in the calf. He was sure to recover, the doctor said, but in the meantime, and for weeks to come, he must not walk nor move his arm, nor so much as speak when he could help it. My own accidental cut across the knuckles was a flea bite. Dr. Livesey patched it up with plaster and pulled my ears for me into the bargain. After dinner, the squire and the doctor sat by the captain's side while in consultation, and when they had talked to their heart's content, it being then a little past noon, the doctor took up his hat and pistols, girt on a cutlass, put the chart in his pocket, and with a musket over his shoulder crossed the palisade on the north side and set off briskly through the trees. Gray and I were sitting together at the far end of the blockhouse to be out of earshot of our officers consulting, and Gray took his pipe out of his mouth and fairly forgot to put it back in again, so thunderstruck he was at this occurrence. "Why, in the name of Davy Jones," said he, "is Dr. Livesey mad?" "Why, no," says I, "he's about the last of this crew for that, I take it." "Well, shipmate," said Gray, "mad he may not be, but if he's not, you mark my words, I am." "I take it," replied I. "The doctor has his idea, and if I am right, he's going now to see Ben Gunn." I was right, as appeared later. But in the meantime, the house being stifling hot, and the little patch of sand inside the palisade ablaze with midday sun, I began to get another thought into my head, which was not by any means so right. What I began to do was to envy the doctor walking in the cool shadow of the woods with the birds about him and the pleasant smell of the pines, while I sat grilling with my clothes stuck to the hot resin, and so much blood about me and so many poor dead bodies lying all around that I took a disgust of the place that was almost as strong as fear. All the time I was washing out the blockhouse and then washing up the things from dinner, this disgust and envy kept growing stronger and stronger till at last, being near a bread bag and no one then observing me, I took the first step towards my escapade and filled both pockets of my coat with biscuit. I was a fool, if you like, and certainly I was going to do a foolish, overbold act. But I was determined to do it with all the precautions in my power. These biscuits, should anything befall me, would keep me, at least, from starving till far on in the next day. The next thing I laid hold of was a brace of pistols, and as I already had a powder horn and bullets, I felt myself well supplied with arms. As for the scheme I had in my head, it was not a bad one in itself. I was to go down the sandy spit that divides the anchorage on the east from the open sea, find the white rock I had observed last evening, and ascertain whether it was there or not that Ben Gunn had hidden his boat. A thing quite worth doing, as I still believe. But as I was certain I should not be allowed to leave the enclosure, my only plan was to take French leave and slip out when nobody was watching. And that was so bad a way of doing it as made the thing itself wrong. But I was only a boy, and I had made up my mind. Or I made my mind up. Well, as things at last fell out, I found an admirable opportunity. The squire and Gray were busy helping the captain with his bandages. The coast was clear. I made a bolt for it over the stockade and into the thickest of the trees, and before my absence was observed, I was out of cry of my companions. This was my second folly, far worse than the first, as I left but 2 sound men to guard the house. But, like the first, it was a help towards saving all of us. That's foreshadowing right there. I took my way straight for the east coast of the island, for I was determined to go down the seaside of the spit to avoid all chance of observation from the anchorage. It was already late in the afternoon, although still warm and sunny. As I continued to thread the tall woods, I could hear from far before me not only the continuous thunder of the surf, but a certain tossing of foliage and grinding of boughs, which showed me the sea breeze had set in higher than usual. Soon cool draughts of air began to reach me, and a few steps farther I came forth into the open borders of the grove and saw the sea lying blue and sunny to the horizon, and the surf tumbling and tossing its foam along the beach. I have never seen the sea quiet round Treasure Island. The sun might blaze overhead, the air be without a breath, the surface smooth and blue, but still these great rollers would be running along all the external coast, thundering and thundering by day and night, and I scarce believe there is one spot in the island where a man would be out of earshot of their noise. I walked along beside the surf with great enjoyment, till, thinking I was now got far enough to the south, I took the cover of some thick bushes and crept warily up to the ridge of the spit. Behind me was the sea, in front the anchorage. The sea breeze, as though it had sooner blown itself out by its unusual violence, was already at an end. It had been succeeded by light, variable airs from the south and southeast, carrying great banks of fog, and the anchorage, under lee of Skeleton Island, lay still and leaden as when first we entered it. The Hispaniola, in that unbroken mirror, was exactly portrayed from the truck to the waterline, the Jolly Roger hanging from its peak. Alongside lay one of the gigs, silver in the stern sheets. Him I could always recognize, while a couple of men were leaning over the stern bulwarks, one of them with a red cap, the very rogue that I had seen some hours before stride legs upon the palisade. Apparently, they were talking and laughing, though at that distance, upwards of a mile, I could, of course, hear no word of what was said. All at once there began the most horrid, unearthly screaming, which at first startled me badly, though I had soon remembered the voice of Captain Flint, and even thought I could make out the bird by her bright plumage as she sat perched upon her master's wrist. Soon after, the jolly boat shoved off and pulled for shore, and the man with the red cap and his comrade went below by the cabin companion. Just about the same time, the sun had gone down behind the spyglass, and as the fog was collecting rapidly, it began to grow dark and earnest. I saw I must lose no time if I were to find the boat that evening. The white rock, visible enough above the brush, was still some 1/8 of a mile further down the spit, and it took me a goodish while to get up with it, crawling often on all fours among the scrub. Night had almost come when I laid my hand on its rough sides. Right below it there was an exceedingly small hollow of green turf, hidden by banks and a thick underwood about knee-deep that grew there very plentifully, and in the center of the dell, sure enough, a little tent of goat skins, like what the gypsies carry about with them in England. I dropped in the hollow, lifted the side of the tent, and there was Ben Gunn's boat. Homemade, if ever anything was homemade, a rude, lopsided framework of tough wood, and stretched upon that a covering of goat skin, with the hair inside. The thing was extremely small, even for me, and I can hardly imagine that it could have floated with a full-sized man. There was one thwart set as low as possible, a kind of stretcher in the bows, and a double paddle for propulsion. I had not then seen a coracle, such as the ancient Britons made, but I have seen one since, and I can give you no fairer idea of Ben Gunn's boat than by saying it was like the first and the worst coracle ever made by man. But the great advantage of the coracle is certainly possessed, for it was exceedingly light and portable. Well, now that I had found the boat, you would have thought that I had enough of truantry for once, but in the meantime, I had taken another notion and become so obstinately fond of that I would have carried it out, I believe, in the teeth of Captain Smollett himself. This was to slip out under cover of the night, cut the Hispaniola adrift, and let her go ashore where she fancied. I had quite made up my mind that the mutineers, after their repulse of the morning, had nothing nearer their hearts than to up an anchor and away to sea. This, I thought, would be a fine thing to prevent. And now that I had seen how they left their watchmen unprovided with a boat, I thought it might be done with little risk. Down I sat to wait for darkness, and made a hearty meal of biscuit. It was a night out of 10,000 for my purpose. The fog had now buried all heaven. As the last rays of daylight dwindled and disappeared, absolute blackness settled down on Treasure Island, and, When at last I shouldered the coracle and groped my way stumblingly out of the hollow where I had supped, there were but 2 points visible on the whole anchorage. One was the great fire on shore, by which the defeated pirates lay carousing in the swamp. The other, a mere blur of light upon the darkness, indicated the position of the anchored ship. She had swung round to the ebb. Her bow was now towards me. The only lights on board were in the cabin, and what I saw was merely a reflection on the fog of the strong rays that flowed from the stern window. The ebb had already run some time, and I had to wade through a long belt of swampy sand, where I sank several times over the ankle, before I came to the edge of the retreating water and waded a little way in, with some strength and dexterity, set my coracle keel downwards on the surface. Okay, I'm going to go back a little bit over that. First of all, I'm working in a very distracting environment, as you may be as well. And so we have to adapt a little bit. I have dogs running in and out, people coming in and out the doors, my grandson screaming in the background. I don't know what your distractions are, but whenever you're doing something like this and you're trying to read and get work done and you've got to focus, the most important thing you can do is go back over what you did. So many times you'll be reading a book and you'll be far into the paragraph, like several paragraphs in, you'll realize I didn't understand or even pay attention to what I just read. So what we're going to do is something that I like to do when we're doing close reading, and I've probably even made you do in class before, is go back and look at each paragraph and kind of one line summarize it. Okay, the very beginning paragraph 1, that starts with "There was no return of the mutineers," is just kind of wrapping up what just happened. There was just a battle, and the squire and Jim are set to cook while the doctor is working on the patients, the people who had been injured in the battle. All right. The next paragraph talks about the people who had been injured, and 8 people had been injured, and only 3 survived. And only 2 out of those 3 actually survived their injuries after being treated by the doctor and, over time. Okay. So Hunter was one of the good guys and he died. Okay. So did Joyce, but that was in the previous one. So they're really down to just very few people. Okay. There's the squire, there's Abraham Gray, there's Dr. Livesey, and there's Captain Smollett, and there's Jim, and that is it. Okay. And Captain Smollett, as it talks about in the next paragraph, is hurt very badly. He was shot basically in his shoulder, like it broke his shoulder blade, and it also hurt his lung. So that's a pretty serious injury, especially in a time where they didn't have hospitals like we do. And he's on an island. He does have a doctor. That's a good thing. But he is hurt pretty badly. And also his leg has been shot too. He's not supposed to walk, and he's really even not supposed to talk. So he's pretty badly hurt. Okay. And so Jim mentions that, yes, he did get cut across his knuckles in the battle when he went to go grab his cutlass, but it's no big deal, and he got treated by the doctor. So then the next little paragraph is talking about how the doctor, after dinner, grabbed his pistols and his cutlass and the map, which, remember, they call it a chart. So whenever you hear he says that he has a chart, he has a map, okay, and the map of the island. And so he took off out of the palisade. And Abraham Gray is like, whoa, is he crazy? And Jim, in the following paragraphs, is like, no, he's not crazy. He's on his way to go see Ben Gunn. So Jim knows what he's up to. And then when you get down here to the next pretty good sized paragraph, the leaving of the doctor is kind of what inspires Jim to get restless. He's not happy. He's not comfortable. Again, like it was on the boat, hot, sticky, smelly. There was a battle. People died. It's not good. He's in a place where he's really miserable. And he says that he took a disgust of the place that was almost as strong as fear. I would almost say it was fear. He is a kid. He's kind of traumatized. He's been seeing people die. That's never going to be a good thing. He was in a battle where he nearly died multiple times. So he's having a bad time and he's really not handling it well. And he feels like he wants to escape. So he starts kind of thinking about something he might want to do. So he steals some biscuits from the bread bag. And that was his first part of his plan. And then when nobody's looking, he takes 2 pistols. So he's got pistols with bullets and powder, and he's got food. And then it talks a little bit about how he doesn't tell anybody. He doesn't say, hey guys, I'm going to go for a walk. He just jets out of there when nobody's looking so that they can't tell him he can't go, which is Interesting. The character of Jim, I mean, this is the second time he's done this. He just decides that he's just going to take off, and he knows they would tell him no, right? And he takes off and he doesn't stop until he's sure he's far enough away that they're not going to catch him. And we skip down here a little bit. Look at the paragraph that starts, I took my way straight for the east coast of the island. Just a lot of description of where he's going. What you need to get from this is that he leaves the stockade. And if you have a map, and you might, because the internet does have maps of Treasure Island based on what Robert Louis Stevenson, the author, had originally drawn. You can look at that and you can kind of see that he went from the stockade towards the anchorage. Okay. And so when we get down, and first of all, he's really talking about how you always, wherever you are on Treasure Island, you can hear the sea. Okay, the sea is always just rolling and rumbling and crashing and stuff like that. You can hear it wherever you are. But then he gets down to the anchorage. So get down there to the paragraph that says, behind me was the sea, in front the anchorage. Okay, because the anchorage is sheltered by the little island that is near Treasure Island, Skeleton Island. And so it is a flat, mirrored surface of calm, but the ocean is on the other side of like a little peninsula of land that you can hear it still crashing, but there's this flat, calm surface where the Hispaniola is. And he starts to tell you what he sees. He sees the Hispaniola, and it's got the Jolly Roger. He sees Long John Silver. He sees him talking to the guy with the red cap that had been in the battle in the chapter before. And he hears the voice of the parrot, Captain Flint. Okay. So he sees that Long John Silver is on shore, and that he goes to shore in the jolly boat, and that there are two men on the Hispaniola. Okay, and as you keep going down there, those two men go into the cabin, and it's starting to get dark. And so Jim's like, oh, we better hurry. So when you get down to the part where it says the white rock visible enough above the brush, that's the white rock that Ben Gunn pointed out to him. He said that's where he talked about that's where his boat was, at the white rock. And so that's where Jim is headed. He's headed to the white rock to find the boat. And so he goes up there, and then he does find it. He finds a little tent that covers this boat, and he spends a little time describing to you this boat. I'll draw a picture before we get to the next one so you can see it, but it's kind of a roundish boat. It has it says here that it is rude, which means just kind of patched together, like something an elementary kid would make in wood shop, if they had wood shop. And it's lopsided, and it's tough wood. That's good. And it's got a goat skin stretched on it with the hide on the inside, so the smooth side on the outside. And it wasn't big enough really for even a full-size man. Ben Gunn's kind of a small man, and Jim Hawkins is a kid. So that's what he's got. And he calls it a coracle. A coracle is a type of boat, like a little round primitive boat that like fishermen would use close to shore or on lakes and things like that. And so he waits for darkness, and he eats the biscuits as we're looking down here some more. And he waits, and he's listening to the pirates carousing, and there's fog, and he can see the two things. He can see the bonfire where the pirates are, and you can see the lights of the Hispaniola out on the anchorage. Remember what anchorage is. That's where they anchor the boat in the calm water that's protected from the sea. And then he talks about the ebb. Ebb, E-B-B, is when the tide is going out. So if you've ever been to the beach and there's a whole lot of wet sand because the ocean has slid back a ways, that's called ebb tide. Okay, the other one is high tide. High tide is when the waters come up as far as it goes, and ebb tide is when it goes back as far as it can. And ebb tide pulls things away from the shore. And so right now the Hispaniola is anchored. The anchors drop down into the sand below the water, right? Boom. And so this is Jim's opportunity. Okay. Go to your paperwork. Make sure you write a summary. If you even like what I just said, you summarize what I just said, and then you're going to actually have the summary. So that was like the short version. and the summary is the even shorter version. Make sure that you write down things that you wondered about or you didn't understand. Don't forget to write the vocabulary. So many people aren't doing the vocabulary and the definitions. And to learn a new vocabulary word, you have to interact with it at least 18 times meaningfully. So that's one time trying to make meaning of it in the story. Another time, like deciding that that word is important and should probably be known and writing it down. And then another time doing the definition. You're partway into knowing that word for the rest of your life and being able to use it if you actually take time to build your vocabulary this way. To become a better reader, to become a more advanced reader, and to be ready for high school, you need to build your vocabulary. Yes, some of this vocabulary may not be useful in the future for you because it's older or it's more specific to like boats and things like that. But one way or another, it's going to help you understand the story better if you do the vocabulary part. So please do that. And also, you're going to need to write down what characters do. That's been being skipped by a few of you as well, or you're just leaving out some. There are 3 spaces there. For this one, I would suggest definitely Jim, because he does a lot. But there are other people that do things in this as well. The doctor. The doctor does something very important. You can write about the captain, so you can explain his injuries, or you can write about Abraham Gray's reaction to the doctor leaving. Either of those is interesting and adds to your understanding of the story. Don't skip it. All right? Okay. We'll be back again for the next chapter soon.